Now joining us for a conversation is Claudia Chender, leader of the NDP here in Nova Scotia. Claudia Chender, welcome to the show.
Thank you. Good morning.
Good morning. So lots to get to. First off, this release, hot off the presses, I just received this morning, so I thought I would ask you about it first. And it's, I'll read a bit of it. Nearly 3 years after Tim Houston's government was elected, the number of people experiencing homelessness in Halifax alone has more than tripled. And your party and you are calling for immediate action to prevent this crisis from getting even worse. What has not been done, or what is not being done that should be done, in your opinion?
Well, I appreciate the question because I think it's on the top of a lot of people's minds. I think at the root of it, we have to acknowledge who is the hardest hit by the housing crisis. So the folks who are sleeping rough don't breathe a sigh of relief at the interest rate cut, although I do because I have a variable rate mortgage. Those kind of measures, the cranes in the sky, same thing. They're not going to be impacted by that. And so, we've talked a lot about housing over the last few years. And even beyond. I think that Tim Houston has very firmly decided that his line on housing is that the answer to the housing crisis is to build more housing. And, we've talked about this before. Our response is to say, yes, and you have to prioritize the people who need it the most. And that is what we don't see. And so it's not that there aren't things happening, Todd. There are. So in Dartmouth, like where I am, we've got the Bridge, the old Holiday Inn hotel that was purchased by the province. We have pallet shelters going in. We have modular housing. But all of these are temporary, right? By design, they're supposed to be transitional. And there's nothing on the other side. There's no new public housing. There's very little new affordable housing. Again, there are some programs, but the scale is way off. And that's why we see headlines like we've seen the last couple of weeks about, 28 people getting evicted from a rooming house on North Street. The government simply can't allow that to happen because when people get evicted from a space like that, they end up in a tent. And I just have to say that in 2024, in a province like Nova Scotia, in a country like Canada, no one should be forced to live outdoors. And the situation is such that people are literally being forced to live outdoors.
All right. So is the Tenancies Act the vehicle in which could change these rent evictions? Is that the where we should be looking here?
I think there's a couple things. So, yes, I think tenancies, we have a fixed term lease loophole to the rent cap, which means that, the rent cap's 5%, but rents are rising somewhere between 10 and 15%, depending where you look. And a lot of people can't absorb those increases and just have nowhere to go. So that's huge. People are being rent evicted all the time and being evicted through this loophole. But at the same time, we hear landlords when they say, but things are so expensive. This 5% rent cap can't keep us solvent. So this is why we continue to advocate for rent control, which is similar to what we have in the rest of the country and what we had here. So rent increases can be stable and predictable. If there are major renovations needed, landlords can apply to have those. That's one thing for sure. But also, we just need more supply. I mean, we need more housing, but we need more truly affordable non-market housing. So we need the government to be building and buying and supporting the creation of housing that is not subject to the market, which is crazy right now, particularly when you pit it against wages and, in some cases, income assistance for folks who aren't able to work. So I think it's that two-pronged piece. We need more supply, we need more affordable, truly affordable supply, and we need a really urgent approach to that. None of these cranes in the sky right now are building that, none of them. And we need to make sure that people who are housed remain housed. And I think the government's failing on both counts.
Okay, so you mentioned building housing. Government should be building housing, not subject to the market. Who will do that building? Will that be? Do you suggest a Crown corporation is established, or will it ultimately fall on the private developers and through subsidies of some sort? And we know that is generally not efficient And to add to that, and again, Claudia, I'm not trying to be negative here. I'm really not, and I appreciate your efforts here, and I agree. But executing it is the challenge here, in my estimation. Yeah. What's your take on that?
I think, there's a lot of different ways to do it, Todd. The government has announced some small number of public housing units. I think a lot of people want public housing. I think the reality is that government is not an efficient builder of housing. So yes, we need more public housing. That's not totally the answer. I think also subsidies to private developers don't work. So we saw that in the Mount Hope subdivision. The government wrote Clayton a check for $22 million and they returned it and said, no, thanks. Like, we don't want to build this. It doesn't work for us. So I think there are some emerging examples of partnerships, like true partnerships between nonprofits and non-market providers and private developers. So that's possible. But I also think, things like that federal rapid housing initiative, where there was money that was given directly to non-market providers to build at a low cost quickly, have had some success. So we've seen the Affordable Housing Association of Nova Scotia, ADSM, build not just affordable units that come on quickly, but they're also really cheap because they're built to, kind of very high efficiency standards. So the bills are really low. So I think it can be done, but honestly, I think what we really need to do is support the people in the non-market sector who are doing it, those nonprofits. So ADSM's doing it, Dartmouth Nonprofit Housing is doing it. In every community in Nova Scotia, you've got folks who have some capacity, and we have to support them. But in the meantime, Todd, to kind of stem people being kicked out, we do have this, targeted housing support rent supplement. The challenge now is that you're only eligible if it's 50% of your gross income is being paid to rent. Imagine that for a minute. Mm-hmm. I mean, if 50% of your gross income is being paid to rent, you're not really eating 3 meals a day, are you? Mm. And so the reality is that no one is eligible for that anymore, which is one of the things we talked about in our release. But I agree with you. It's not an easy solve. Mm-hmm. And I think that that's why the government keeps kind of kicking it down the road. But, when we drive through the biggest city in our province and we see people sleeping outdoors all over the place, many of whom it's simply economics. Mm-hmm. They just can't afford a roof over their heads. I think government intervention is required. Okay,
the province this week did announce some more support for Nova Scotians, as you were talking about, when it comes to providers, as mentioned, mm-hmm. at $500,000 aimed at addressing mm-hmm. barriers to finding or maintaining housing. Do they get props for that? Mm-hmm. Brendan McGuire made that announcement this week. What are your comments on that?
Yeah, I mean, like I said, I think it's not that nothing's happening. Things are happening, and I think every dollar is helpful, but we need a concerted plan that is going to make a real difference. And right now it feels like so many Band-Aids. So absolutely they get props for it. I think every time we see support for the folks who need it, and specifically for the organizations on the front lines, we are more than happy to give credit. But the reality is I don't think that that's going to stem the tide. And so I think we need a more robust plan where all of this housing, the government is incentivizing, right? We're mm-hmm. waiving tax fees, we're expediting development processes, we're paving over wetlands, like all that stuff. If the argument is we need housing, well, okay, but shouldn't we be prioritizing the people who need it the most? I think that's where we come down. And that really comes out of the Department of Housing, and that's where we haven't seen the action that we think is required.